I was 12 the day my world cracked open. It happened at a gas station just off I-70, the kind of place with flickering lights and a bathroom key chained to a cinder block. Mom said she had to grab something real quick, and Dad told me to watch the bags. They didn't even turn off the engine. I sat on the curb, balancing a bag of Funyuns on my knees, kicking gravel into tiny piles. 5 minutes passed. Then, 10. The car stayed parked but empty. An old country song crackled through the speakers at the pumps. I remember thinking, maybe they're arguing. That wasn't unusual. 20 minutes later, a woman with a cigarette hanging from her lip leaned out of a beat-up pickup and said, "You waiting on someone, kid?" "Yeah," I said, voice cracking more than I'd have liked. "My parents!" She squinted, like she could see something in me that I hadn't figured out yet, and just nodded. Didn't say another word, just drove off. When the sun started dipping behind the billboard that said, "World's biggest ball of yarn, 30 miles ahead," I knew. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a test. They weren't coming back. The worst part? I wasn't surprised. Our house had always felt temporary. Mom kept her shoes by the door like she might bolt any second. Dad's duffel bag was never fully unpacked, always half-zipped and ready to go. Meals were fast, conversations faster. "We're a team," they'd say. But it was the kind of team where everyone hopes someone else will fumble first, so they have an excuse to quit. I should have seen it, Lal Gabar, but knowing doesn't stop the cold from sinking into your stomach when you realize you've been officially left behind. My backpack had 2 granola bars, a half-charged Game Boy, and a $20 bill. Not much, but enough to make me feel like I had options. I sat there, weighing them, like I was suddenly CEO of my own survival. Option 1. Wait, someone might notice. Someone might care. Option 2. Move. Movement 1. I stood up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked. No plan, no map. Just the stubborn belief that forward was better than still. A mile down the road I found a diner glowing like a beacon, the kind of place where truckers outnumbered families, and the pie case was older than I was. I pushed open the door, and a bell jingled overhead. A woman behind the counter looked up from wiping a mug. "Hungry?" she asked. "Yeah," I croaked. She poured me a water without asking and slid a menu across the counter. Her name tag said Lou. She had hair the color of cigarette ash and arms that could probably bench press a Buick. "You alone?" she asked, not unkindly. I hesitated, then nodded. Lou didn't blink. "You eat first. We'll figure the rest out later." She brought me a grilled cheese and a slice of cherry pie so sweet it made my teeth ache. I ate like a stray dog, head down, half expecting someone to yank the plate away. Afterward, Lou refilled my water and leaned on the counter. "Where you headed?" "Don't know," I said. She chewed that over for a second, then said, "Well, you ain't staying here. Place closes at midnight." "Fair." I pulled out my 20, hands shaking a little. She pushed it back across the counter. "On the house," she said. "Consider it a loan. Pay it forward someday." I pocketed the bill, tucked my bag tighter under my arm, and stepped back into the night. The stars overhead were so bright it hurt to look at them. I had no plan, no backup, and no idea what tomorrow would look like. But I was moving, and that was enough. The night swallowed me whole. The road stretched like a ribbon into the dark, lit only by flickering streetlights and the occasional pair of headlights rushing past. Nobody stopped. I didn't blame them. I wouldn't have stopped for me either. A scraggly kid with a too-big backpack, and shoes already starting to rub blisters. I figured I had a few hours before exhaustion won. I kept walking, counting my steps to stay awake. 1,000 steps, then another 1,000. Somewhere around 5,000, I stopped counting. Etchesy. The town thinned out pretty quick. Gas stations and diners gave way to shuttered motels and fields that smelled like wet hay. I kept to the edge of the road, jumping the ditch every time a car screamed by. My shadow kept me company, long and stretched under the streetlights, like some bony guardian angel. Around midnight, I found an old playground behind what used to be a church. The swings creaked in the breeze like they were whispering secrets. I figured it was as good a place as any to crash for a few hours. I curled up inside the hollow of a crooked slide, hugging my backpack to my chest. It wasn't comfortable, but at least it was dry. I pulled the hood of my sweatshirt over my head and listened to the wind skimming across the fields. Sleep came in bursts, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, each time interrupted by a noise that set my heart hammering. But nobody came. Just me and the wind, and the feeling of being forgotten. Angelo, when the sky started to blush pink with dawn, I stretched my aching legs and stood. Everything hurt. My back, my feet, my pride. I headed west, toward where I figured the bigger towns would be. Bigger towns meant more people. More people meant more chances. About 3 miles in, a battered Ford pickup pulled onto the shoulder ahead of me. I froze, instincts screaming to run. The driver's window rolled down, and a man's voice called out, "You need a lift, kid?" He looked rough but not mean. Probably mid-50s, wearing a ball cap stained with sweat. I saw a thermos on the dashboard and a toolbox in the back seat. I sized him up fast, like I always did with adults, looking for cracks in the facade. No twitchy movements. No fake smile. Just tired eyes. Still, I shook my head. "I'm good." "Suit yourself," he said, and tipped his hat before pulling away. I waited until the truck disappeared around the bend before I exhaled. Trust wasn't something I carried anymore. Maybe it never had been. I walked another few hours before I saw the first real town. Not much to look at. One main street, a grocery store, a laundromat, and a library with chipped steps. The library called to me like a lighthouse, air-conditioned. Quiet. Safe. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. Nobody looked up. Perfect. I wandered through the aisles, inhaling that dusty book smell that somehow made everything feel less terrifying. I found a corner table and collapsed into a chair, pulling out my notebook. Dapper. I started writing. Dapper. Not a plan. Not yet. Dapper, just words. Loose, jagged, uncertain. But it was a start. Dapper. And right now, a start was everything. The library became my shelter. The first day, I stayed until closing. The librarian, a wiry woman with glasses that made her eyes look huge, didn't ask questions. She just flipped the closed sign around at 8 p.m. and flicked the lights off row by row, like she was dimming a stage. I hid in the back, between travel and self-help, heart hammering. When the last light snapped off, I curled up under a table and pulled my hoodie tight around me. Somewhere between exhaustion and fear, I slept. Morning found me before the librarian did. I slipped out before the first staff arrived, feet pounding the sidewalk, heart racing like I'd pulled off a bank heist. After that, I got smarter. Every morning, I'd wash up in the gas station bathroom across the street. Cold water. Rough paper towels. Sometimes a $1 shower at the truck stop 2 miles out if I was feeling lucky. I'd scrounge breakfast, a bruised banana from the corner store, or a vending machine granola bar. Then I'd head back to the library, blending into the sea of quiet kids doing homework and retirees flipping through newspapers. My notebook grew fatter. Lists. Maps. Sketches. Plans. If survival had a curriculum, I was acing it. About a week in, the librarian finally spoke to me. Her name was Mrs. Carter. She caught me near the encyclopedias, arms loaded with books about geography, survival skills, and weirdly enough, origami. "You like folding paper, huh?" she asked, smiling with just one side of her mouth. "I guess," I muttered. "You should check out Sadako and the 1,000 Paper Cranes," she said, tapping a shelf. "Might find it inspiring." I nodded, though I had no idea what she meant. Later, at my corner table, I found the book. It was about a girl who believed if she folded 1,000 cranes, she'd be granted a wish. Go Ekatiman. I didn't believe in magic. But I started folding anyway. Rashad Tenter, hey. Scraps of notebook paper. Flyers. Receipts. Every crane felt like a brick in a wall I was building between me and the nothingness. Train sousing. By the end of the second week, I had a whole flock stuffed into my backpack. And that's when trouble finally caught up. Hashava. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the library held toddler story hour. and the whole place smelled like juice and graham crackers. Two men in uniforms walked in, not cops. Security. They wore navy polos with city services stitched over the heart. Mrs. Carter spotted them first. Her smile flickered. She stood straighter. They scanned the room. One pointed at me. "You," he said, voice low but sharp. "Come here." My body moved before my brain caught up. I dropped my pencil, knocking cranes to the floor. "What's your name?" the taller one asked. "Sam," I lied. "Last name?" "Peters." The man scribbled something on a clipboard. "How old are you, Sam?" 13, I said, throwing an extra year on for insurance. Mrs. Carter hovered nearby, arms crossed tight. "We've had reports," the man continued, "about a runaway hanging around." "Not me," I said, too fast. He narrowed his eyes. "You got a home, kid?" "Yes, sir." "Parents?" "Yes, sir." "Where they at?" I hesitated just a second too long. Mrs. Carter stepped in. "Gentlemen, unless you have cause, I suggest you leave this young man alone." The men exchanged a look. "We'll be back," the taller one said, and they left. I stared at Mrs. Carter, throat dry. She bent down, picked up one of my crumpled cranes and smoothed it out with surprising gentleness. "You need help?" she asked, voice low. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her everything. The gas station. The walking. The nights under playground slides. Practice. Instead, I shook my head. Practice. Because needing help and asking for it were two very different things. She sighed, tucked the crane into her cardigan pocket, and said, "Library closes at 6 tonight. Be smart." I nodded. Then I packed my things and left before the sun set. Out into the world again. Paper cranes stuffed in my bag. 1,000 tiny hopes folded against the dark. The sun slipped low as I wandered the outskirts of town. Every step a coin toss between staying hidden and finding help. I knew better than to trust easy offers, and staying put too long was like painting a target on my back. I passed rusted trailers, sagging porches, and a gas station that sold more beer than gas. Somewhere along the way, I realized I'd been walking in circles. Towns like this were designed that way, roads that promised escape but loop you right back into the middle. My stomach growled like a warning siren. The 20 in my pocket was thinning fast, mostly to vending machines and gas station coffee. I needed a new plan. I cut through the side streets and found a church with a food pantry sign posted on the door. They were closing up, but an older woman with hair like spun silver handed me a brown bag anyway. 2 sandwiches, a bottle of water, and a packet of apple slices. "Bless you, son," she said, and pressed a granola bar into my hand like it was a lifeline. I muttered a thank you and slipped away before she could ask questions. I ate half a sandwich sitting on a curb, watching the town change colors as the sun dipped. The other half I wrapped carefully, like it was treasure. The night was a slow, grinding thing. Nowhere to sleep. Not safely. I tried the playground again, but a cop car cruised past, and I ducked into a drainage ditch, heart jackhammering. That's when I realized it wasn't enough to survive day by day. I needed a long game. I needed movement. Bus station. Bus station. Every town had one, even towns that had no business having one. I found it tucked behind a liquor store, a tiny cinder block building that smelled like burned coffee and disappointment. A broken vending machine buzzed in the corner. The ticket window was closed for the night, but a schedule taped to the wall showed a bus heading west in the morning. West sounded good. I wedged myself behind a row of cracked plastic chairs and tried to get comfortable. Hard plastic against bone. Lights buzzing overhead. A janitor sweeping up crushed soda cans and muttering to himself. "Hell was she, Jay." Sleep came in short, suspicious bursts. Every creak of the door, every cough from the old man snoring 2 rows over, jolted me awake. Sometime around 4 a.m., a woman in a yellow jacket sat down across from me. She had wild curly hair and a face lined like a road map. She pulled out a deck of cards and started shuffling. "Want to play?" she asked, voice scratchy, but kind. I shook my head. She dealt anyway. Solitaire. Silent. She wasn't playing against me, just herself. "Bus comes at 6, she said without looking up. "Better have your fare ready." Driver, don't wait. I nodded, clutching my backpack tighter. Where are you headed? She asked. West, I said. She grinned, showing a missing tooth. Good place for new starts. We sat in silence after that, the cards whispering against each other with every shuffle. When the sky began to lighten to a tired gray, a few more people trickled into the station. A guy with a guitar case. A woman with 2 crying kids. A teenager whose face looked just as hollowed out as mine felt. The bus growled up to the curb at 6:03 sharp, belching a cloud of exhaust. I lined up behind the others, heart thudding in my chest. The driver barely looked at me when I held out my crumpled 20. He made change with the bored efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. I climbed the steps and picked a seat near the middle, not too close to the driver, not too far back. Just another shadow. Hussa! As the bus rumbled out of town, I pressed my forehead to the window. The town got smaller and smaller in the glass until it was just another smudge on the horizon. Weave. I didn't know where I was going. Weave. But I knew what I was leaving behind. Weave. And for the first time since the gas station, I felt something stir in my chest. Not hope. Not yet. Just possibility. And sometimes, that's enough. The bus rattled westward, eating up miles like candy. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the world slide by. Sun-bleached fields, sagging barns, lonely gas stations blinking like distant lighthouses. No one on the bus spoke much. A few murmured phone calls, a crying baby now and then, but mostly silence. The kind of silence you wear like a jacket, because it's safer not to make noise. I jotted notes in my notebook as we bumped along. Road signs, exit numbers, town names that sounded made up. Pumpkin Hollow, Seven Forks, Green Bluff. The farther we went, the lighter I felt, like every mile was peeling another layer of my old life away. At a rest stop just past noon, the driver barked, 10 minutes, and swung open the door. I slipped out and stretched my aching legs. Bought a bag of peanuts from a vending machine. Washed my face in the grimy bathroom sink, avoiding my own reflection. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes too big. A kid wearing a mask that didn't fit anymore. Metaphor. Back on the bus, I sat behind a woman in a hoodie covered in band logos. She tapped away on a cracked phone, earbuds jammed in. Across the aisle, a man in a trucker hat snored like a chainsaw. Ha! I pulled out my paper cranes. Unfolded one carefully. Ha! On the inside, in tiny block letters, I'd written, find a place where you can stay. A goal. A plan. Something solid. We rolled into a bigger town around sunset, the kind with fast food joints stacked like dominoes and a Walmart big enough to have its own weather system. The driver announced a layover. 3 hours. I stepped off the bus and blinked against the neon sprawl. First order of business. Food. Real food. I scavenged through my remaining cash and found a greasy burger joint, tucked between a pawn shop and a payday loan place. Inside, the air smelled like fried dreams and broken diets. I ordered the cheapest combo on the menu and ate it slowly, savoring every bite like it might be my last. At the corner table, a group of teens laughed too loud. One of them, a skinny guy with braces, caught my eye and smirked. I looked away fast. Last thing I needed was attention. After I finished eating, I wandered the strip mall. Big stores. Bright lights, too many cameras. Oh, at chorus, I found a bench near a bus stop and pulled my hoodie low. Pretended to be just another kid waiting for a ride. Tayra. Somewhere deep in my gut, fear gnawed. I couldn't stay invisible forever. Not in a place like this. Taya. When I spotted a help wanted sign taped to the window of a dollar store, something clicked. I didn't have ID, didn't have a real address, but I had desperation. Sometimes, that's enough. I walked in and asked for the manager. Mai Tishan, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said, Cheryl, gave me a once-over. You're looking for work? She said like it was a punchline. Anything, I said. She hesitated, then shrugged. We need someone to clean stockrooms after closing. Paid cash. No questions. I nodded so fast my neck popped. Be here tomorrow, she said, 10 o'clock sharp. I thanked her, heart pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. Outside, the night air felt electric. I had a job. Sort of. I had a toehold. I had a reason to stay. When the bus was ready to roll again, I slipped back on and rode it one more stop, closer to the edge of town. Close enough to walk back tomorrow, but far enough to vanish if I had to. I got off alone, under a flickering streetlight, and watched the bus pull away into the dark. Ahead of me was a long, cracked sidewalk leading past shuttered shops and silent houses. Behind me was everything I'd already survived. I adjusted my backpack and started walking. Toward something that might not even have a name yet. Toward something that might finally be mine. The morning was cool and mean. I slept maybe 2 hours, tucked behind a dumpster behind an abandoned mattress store. The concrete left a crisscross of bruises up my arms, but at least no one bothered me. I washed up at a gas station bathroom again, my new morning ritual, and made it to the dollar store by 9:45. I waited by the back door, heart hammering like a kid about to get called into the principal's office. At exactly 10, Cheryl showed up. She didn't smile, just handed me a broom and pointed at the storeroom. "Sweep first, then trash," she said. "Don't steal anything." "Yes, ma'am," I said. The work was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty, boring, repetitive. But there was something beautiful about it too. It was simple. Predictable. I swept between broken crates of off-brand cereal and Halloween decorations nobody bought. I hauled boxes to the dumpster. I wiped shelves until they stopped feeling sticky. At noon, Cheryl tossed me a $10 bill and a bottle of water. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I will," I promised. And I meant it. I spent that first $10 carefully. A pack of peanut butter crackers, a travel-sized deodorant, and a new pen for my notebook. Essentials. The rest I hid deep in my sock. That night, I found a better place to crash, an old laundromat that had closed months ago. One of the side doors had a busted lock. Inside, the smell of soap and rust was thick, but the machines made good walls to sleep behind, plus it was dry and mostly warm. I started thinking of it as base camp. By the end of the week, I had a rhythm. Work, eat, scout for safer places, sleep, repeat. Cheryl never asked questions. She just paid cash and nodded when I showed up. I liked that about her, the way she let me exist without demanding an explanation. On the 6th night, she handed me an old hoodie from the lost and found bin. "Getting cold," she said, like it was no big deal. "Thanks," I said, my throat a little tight. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my bag. Every night, I folded a crane before sleeping. The laundromat floor was littered with them, little wrinkled wishes standing guard around my backpack. I started writing more seriously too. I backpack. Lists turned into paragraphs. Paragraphs turned into plans. I backpack. If I could keep working. If I could save enough. If I could get a real room somewhere. Maybe even go back to school. I made myself a new promise, scribbled at the top of a fresh page. Build something they can't tear down. But even as I wrote it, I knew the world wasn't going to just let me. Kibi. Not without a fight. Kibi. And sure enough, the fight found me. Kibi. It was a Friday night when the trouble started. Kibi te. I was walking back to the laundromat, hood up, head down, when a voice called out from across the street. "Hey!" I kept walking. "Hey, kid!" 2 figures crossed under the street lamp. Teenagers, maybe 17 or 18. Baggy jeans, angry shoulders, the kind of swagger that made my stomach knot. "Where you think you're going?" one of them sneered. I ignored him and kept moving. "Faster now." "Hey! We're talking to you." A shove between my shoulders made me stumble. "What's in the bag?" the second one asked. "Nothing," I said, voice low. "Yeah? Let's see." I turned, heart pounding, ready to bolt, when an engine roared nearby. Headlights flashed. The teens froze, then cursed and scattered. A beat-up pickup truck rolled to a stop. Behind the wheel was an old man with a face like dried leather. "You all right, boy?" he called. I nodded stiffly. "Get in then. Before they come back." Every survival instinct screamed not to, but sometimes, you gamble. I climbed in. The truck smelled like oil and menthols. The man wore a ratty baseball cap and had a voice like gravel. "Name's Walt," he said. "Don't worry. Ain't gonna hurt you. We drove in silence for a while. I watched the streets blur past, tension buzzing in my veins. Ugh. Finally, Walt pulled into the parking lot of an old mechanic shop. Shutters down. Lights off. I sleep in the back, he said. Ain't much. But if you need a place for a night, it's dry. He didn't wait for an answer. Just unlocked the side door and disappeared inside. I sat there, debating. Trust. Risk. Survival. Finally, I followed. The back room was cluttered with old cots, toolboxes, and a battered coffee pot. Walt tossed a blanket at me. Rules, he said, holding up 3 fingers. No stealing. No cops. No questions. Deal, I said. I curled up on a cot and listened to the building settle around me. Maybe the world wasn't full of monsters. Maybe, just maybe, there were still a few good ones left. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was living. Even if it was just for one night. I woke to the smell of burnt coffee and motor oil. Walt was already up, fiddling with something under the hood of an ancient Dodge truck that looked like it had seen 2 wars and lost both. Mornin', he said without turning around. Morning, I croaked back, stretching until my joints popped. He pointed to a chipped mug sitting on a workbench. Coffee's awful, but it's hot. I poured a cup and cradled it between my hands. It tasted like regret and rust, but it warmed me from the inside out. You got a plan, kid? Walt asked eventually. Working on it, I said. He nodded, like that was the only answer that made sense. We spent the day in a rhythm. Walt tinkered with cars. I swept, hauled, fetched tools. We barely spoke, but it didn't feel like silence the way it used to. It felt like space. Like breathing. When noon rolled around, Walt pulled 2 sandwiches out of a dented cooler. Tossed me one without a word. Thanks, I said, meaning it. He shrugged. Everyone's gotta eat. That night, back in the cot, I pulled out my notebook and made a new list. This one wasn't about survival, it was about building. Find steady work. Save for a real place. Get an ID somehow. Finish school. Big dreams. Heavy dreams. But dreams, all the same. I folded a crane out of an old receipt and set it on the cracked windowsill. By the end of the week, Walt handed me a $50 bill. For helpin', he said, gruff as ever. It felt heavier than any money I'd held in my life. Not just because of the number, but because of what it meant. Work, trust, earned, not given. You don't have to, I said. Ain't charity, he said. It's pay for a job well done. I pocketed it carefully, like it might disappear if I blinked. Later that night, Walt sat on a folding chair out front, smoking a cigarette and staring up at the stars. You know, he said without looking at me, the trick ain't just surviving. It's figuring out what you want to survive for. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because deep down, I already knew. Or else. I wanted to survive to prove them wrong. To prove I wasn't disposable. To build something so solid, so unbreakable, that no one could ever take it from me again. The next morning, Walt offered me something I hadn't even dared hope for. I could use an extra set of hands regular, he said. A place to crash, a little cash, keep your head down. I'd like that, I said, voice thick. Then it settled. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a rescue. It was a spark. And sometimes, that's all you need to start a fire. The weeks rolled by like slow thunder. Every day I swept floors, cleaned tools, fetched parts, learned things by just being there, things that mattered. How to rebuild a carburetor. How to tell if a radiator was salvageable just by the way it hissed when you touched it. How to listen, really listen, when someone older and worn taught you without teaching. Walt never asked about my past. Never pried. I think he figured it out, or enough of it to know better than to poke old wounds. Instead, he showed me how to survive differently. How to fix what was broken instead of tossing it out. How to see value in things and people the world had given up on. One night, after a long day of greasy hands and busted knuckles, I sat outside on the loading dock, notebook on my lap. The cranes were there too, tucked into the torn front pocket of my backpack. One by one, I unfolded them. Inside each, a message I'd written to myself weeks ago. Find safety. Trust carefully. Stay moving. But one stood out. The last one I'd folded at the library. Find home. It hit me like a punch. Not a place. Not four walls. Home was the people who didn't leave. The ones who stayed even when it was hard. Even when you were hard to love. Ulayala. And somehow, in a dusty mechanic's shop with a gruff old man, and the smell of gasoline in the air, I was finding it. I started setting new goals. Bigger ones. Study for my GED. Save enough for an apartment. Get certified as a mechanic. Crazy goals for a kid with no real name in this town, no paperwork to prove he existed. But crazy wasn't the enemy. Kreris, staying stuck, was Old Parpik. Walt noticed the changes. Maybe not the lists, but the fire. The way I moved with purpose now. The way my hands stopped shaking when I spoke. One afternoon, he tossed me a battered book about engines. Figure? It's time you got your hands dirty for real, he said. Baka. I grinned. Months passed. Fall turned the trees into patchwork quilts. Winter iced the windows and froze my breath in the mornings. I shoveled snow, kept the fires going, learned how to change oil in weather that made your fingers feel like glass. And little by little, the laundromat days, the cold nights under playground slides, the empty gas stations, they stopped feeling like anchors and started feeling like backstory. Not who I was. Just where I'd been. The day I passed the GED practice test, Walt left a beat-up leather wallet on my cot. Inside was a crumpled 20, a diner punch card, and an ID he'd pulled some strings to get. My real name, my real birth date. You're not invisible anymore, he said. I didn't cry. Not then. But later, in the dark, staring at that laminated square of plastic, I let myself feel it. Not sadness. Not anger. Pride. I had built something. Brick by stubborn brick. Not out of spite. Out of survival. Out of hope. Out of the bone-deep belief that being left behind didn't mean staying behind. Walt offered me a full apprenticeship the next day. Hatherfor. You got good hands, he said. And a better head? I accepted, grinning so hard it hurt. And so, in a battered garage on the edge of nowhere, I started writing a new story. One. Not the story of the kid who got abandoned at a gas station. The story of the kid who kept moving. Kept fighting. Kept folding paper cranes until one of them took flight. Not abandoned. Home wasn't a place I found. City. It was a life I built. Pihi. One breath, one broken car, one stubborn crane at a time. And this time, nobody was going to take it from me. Not ever again.